Welcome to this presentation on summarizing, part of the Building Your Writing Foundation workshop series, brought to you today by the Academic Success Center. The agenda today is we will look at the following questions. What is a summary? When do we use summaries? How are academic summaries organized? And what steps can I use to write an academic summary? So let's look at the first question. What is a summary? According to the Longman Dictionary, a summary is a short statement that gives the main information about something without giving all the details. So where do we use summaries? One place that we use summaries is in daily communication. And to illustrate this, let's look at a short example. So on this slide, you see a conversation between John and Mark. I'm going to read this conversation, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how it demonstrates summary. So John starts, "Hey Mark, how was your weekend?" And Mark replies, "Hi, I had a very productive weekend. I woke up early on Saturday to get my grocery shopping and house chores done. I studied for today's test and finished my summary assignment in the afternoon. Sunday was a more relaxed day. I finished my book and went for a walk in the park." So a few questions to consider about this example of daily communication between two friends. Consider the following questions about Mark's summary of his weekend. How does Mark begin his summary? What information or details does Mark include? And why is that information included? What information or details does Mark not include? And why is that information not included? So let's look at this conversation, this brief conversation. So in Mark's reply to John's question, "How was your weekend?" Mark starts by stating the overall main idea. So Mark says, "I had a very productive weekend." And then Mark includes some relevant details. So he starts to describe some of the activities that he did on the weekend. He says, "I woke up early on Saturday to get my grocery shopping and house chores done. I studied for today's test and finished my summary assignment in the afternoon." And then Mark adds an additional main idea. He mentions Sunday was a more relaxed day. So this is a second main idea. And then finally, he wraps up by providing some additional relevant details. He says, "I finished my book and went for a walk in the park." So here we can see an example of a very brief, everyday conversation between two friends where a simple question is asked and the response actually takes the form of a type of summary, right? We don't often think about this, that we all use this skill of summarizing activities that we've done or activities that we will do in the future, right? When someone asks us, "What are your plans for the upcoming weekend?" right? We will summarize often in sort of broad strokes, what we're going to be doing, right, in the future, without giving too many details, right? Often we all decide what level of detail is necessary, um, given certain factors involved with that interaction. But often we keep the details quite brief, and only the most relevant details are included in our summaries. Now, on the other hand, we find summaries in academic settings, right? So summarizing is, as I mentioned, part of daily communication, and it can feel easy to summarize our weekend activities or a movie we watched recently, for example. However, when asked to write a summary at school, it can often feel more complex, more difficult. And sometimes we're not sure exactly what we need to do. So this will be the focus of the remainder of the presentation today, looking at academic summaries and starting with the question, what is an academic summary and how might it be different from summarizing what you did on the weekend to a friend? So an academic summary is often a written overview of the main ideas of a longer text. So we know that we saw in our definition earlier that a summary is a short restating of only the main idea and relevant details. Right? So by definition, a summary must be shorter, and often quite a lot shorter than the original text. What can summarizing help us do in an academic setting? Summarizing can demonstrate our understanding of the general idea of a source, right? And this is one way that our instructors assess our understanding of what we are being asked to read, right? So a typical assignment would be read chapter 5, summarize the main ideas and relevant details, right? And we can demonstrate that we have read chapter 5 and we have understood those main ideas and relevant details, right? So instructors often use this type of assessment. Summarizing can also help us highlight the overall idea and main points of a source for your audience, as I mentioned. So your audience might be your instructor, often it is, but it may also be your classmates. If you're doing group work for a course, you may, as part of that group work assignment, you may be required to summarize some information and present it either in writing or orally to your group members. And lastly, summarizing can help us avoid getting lost in the minor details of a source. So this is an important academic skill, right? Are we able to identify the essential details, the relevant details, and can we also identify the less relevant details and separate them out one from another? And by the way, summarizing is a great study strategy, right? If you're asked to read a longer piece of text, a great way to build your study habits and prepare for that next quiz, that next test, is at the end of every day of classes, sit down and try to recall what you learned in each class, right? And you could write that out as a short summary. Alternatively, you could meet with a classmate and take turns verbally summarizing what you learned during your courses that day, right? So a great study strategy, building this ability to summarize. So what are the features of an academic summary? Let's look at these features in detail now. So an academic summary is short. We've established that. It must be objective and in your own words. And I will explain each of these now. So short, what does that mean exactly? Again, ask, clarify with your instructor on the length of the summary so that you are sure of the length guidelines. Typically 1 paragraph in length, summaries are, but of course they may be longer depending on the length of the original text, right? And of course, the guidelines set out by the instructor. Objective. What do we mean by objective? A summary must be objective in that your opinion, your thoughts or experiences related to the topic should not influence the summary or should not be included in the summary. And finally, in your own words. We hear instructors use this phrase quite often, right? They might say, demonstrate your understanding of the chapter in your own words. So what do they mean exactly? Well, they mean that you are to express main ideas and relevant details without using the same words as in the original source or the original text. Right? And this is challenging. And another skill that I'm not going to talk about today, paraphrasing, is this skill of reading, understanding, and demonstrating your understanding of ideas, sometimes complex ideas, in your own words. And we do that through paraphrasing. Moving on. The next question we want to answer and look at here today is, how are academic summaries organized? So how should an academic summary begin? The first sentence of a summary should include an opening line that identifies the source being summarized, which could include the author's name, or if you don't have a person's name, it could be the name of an organization. And we also want to include the title of the source in that opening sentence. Right? And this helps the reader understand very clearly, right at the beginning of the summary, exactly what it is that we are summarizing. The first sentence should also include a statement about the overall idea of the source. What should be included? What also should be included? So a summary should not include all the main points or ideas in the work, as I've mentioned. But only, sorry, a summary should include only the main points or ideas, but not the minor details or ideas. How should an academic summary end? Close your summary by restating the overall idea of the work in one sentence. And finally, what steps can I use to write an academic summary? So for this part of the presentation, we will be using a example text, and we will follow 4 steps that you can use to write an academic summary. The 4 steps are, number 1, read and identify the main idea. Highlight essential information and cross out details. Write the first sentence and complete the summary. Step 1, read and identify the main idea of the text. So what does this mean? Typically, a writer will have a topic, a general topic that they write about, and this can be captured in 1 or 2 words and is a general subject. The main idea, however, is different. The main idea is a statement the author makes about the topic and what the text is mostly about. And this is often stated in a complete sentence. It's more complete and more specific. Step 1, read and identify the main idea. So on this slide, we have a short example article, and we're going to use this article sample, this text sample, and follow these 4 steps one at a time. So let's start with reading and identifying the main idea. I'm going to read through this article. So this example is adapted from Benefits of Reading, Positive Impacts for All Ages Every Day by Joseph McCrossen. It's a gym for your brain. The act of reading is a remarkable mental feat, and reading comprehension uses a lot of your brain power. When you're thumbing through a novel, you're building a whole world of people, places, and events in your mind, and remembering it all as you follow the story. This gives your imagination and memory a thorough workout and strengthens networks in various other parts of your brain too. It's well known that your memory improves with use as new memories are created and connected to older ones, making them stronger and easier to recall. Scientists have even found that the other parts of the brain activated by reading can continue to improve days after you've stopped reading, meaning even just a little bit of reading can go a long way. Besides supporting brain development, it's not most people's first idea of relaxation technique, but reading does an awesome job of helping you manage stress. According to research, reading can lead to a lower heart rate and blood pressure and a calmer mind, and just 6 minutes of reading can bring your stress levels down by more than 66%. Okay, let's now identify the main idea as step 1. So I've highlighted what I feel is the main idea in this text sample. So I've highlighted it's a gym for your brain, and also some sections of the first sentence. So reading is a remarkable mental feat. So I've highlighted that. Reading comprehension uses a lot of your brain power. Okay, so I've highlighted that as well. And this is something you can do when you're reading a text, if you're asked to summarize it, or a chapter. If you have the text in in electronic format, PDF, for example, or Word doc, you can use the highlighter tool to go through that text and highlight sections that you feel are the main idea. Right? Of course, you don't want to highlight the whole text, and this is where the skill of identifying the main idea from other parts of the text takes practice. Okay, so step 2 is highlight essential information. So we've done that, what we feel is essential information, and cross out details. Okay, so once we have identified the main idea, start analyzing the information, such as examples and details. Reread the text, and this time highlight the details that are relevant to the main idea and cross out the details that are less relevant or not relevant. So this slide shows step 2, highlighting only the essential information. So you can see where I've identified the main idea using the red arrows and red comment on the right of this slide. And then down below that in blue, I've highlighted what I feel are the key ideas or words that relate back to the main idea. So what have I highlighted? So a little bit farther down in that first paragraph, I've highlighted strengthens networks. I feel that is a key idea that I want to include in my summary. Because remember, ultimately, I'm going through these steps in order to produce a shorter version of the original text, right? While capturing only the most important key ideas. So strengthens networks. I feel that's a key idea. Second paragraph, I've highlighted memory improves with use as new memories are created and connected to older ones. So I feel that is important to include in my summary. And finally, I've highlighted other parts of the brain activated by reading can continue to improve days after you've stopped reading. So I think that is a really interesting idea that I want to include in my summary. So the second part of step 2 is crossing out the details that I don't want to include in my summary. So with black arrows and the black wording on the right at the bottom of this slide, you can see that I am pointing to sections of this text that I have decided to cross out, right? And you can do this again when you're using an electronic version, or even if you have a pen and paper. Of course, you can cross out sections of the text that you decide to not include in your summary. And this will help you go through this process of deciding what is essential and what is not essential. So in the first paragraph, I've decided to cross out the following. When you're thumbing through a novel, you're building a whole world of people, places, and events in your mind and remembering it all as you follow this story. So for me, I have decided I do not want to include that in my summary. That is nice to know information, not need to know information. And likewise, the final paragraph, the third paragraph, I've decided to cross out the whole third paragraph because, again, a summary is a shorter version of the original. I have to make some decisions around what to keep and what not to keep in my summary. And I've decided that third paragraph does not contain key information. Again, it's nice to know information, not need to know information. Okay, so now that we've highlighted the main idea, we've highlighted the key ideas that we want to keep, we've crossed out parts of that text that we've decided to not include in our summary. The next step is writing the first sentence. And remember that the opening sentence should introduce the name and author of the text and should state the main idea. So let's have a look at what this might look like for this particular text example. So I've put that first paragraph from the text that we looked at on this slide, and I've written a possible first sentence. So I've decided to write it in this way and include the name of the author and the title of the article. In the article, Benefits of Reading, Positive Impacts for All Ages Every Day, author Joseph McCrosen discusses the ways that reading can support brain development throughout our lives. So you can see in this first sentence example, I've told the reader the name of the article and who wrote it. And again, it could be somebody's name, or it might be two authors, or more than two authors. Or it could be the name of an organization as the author, right? So we want to let the reader know what is the name of the article and who is responsible for it. And the last step, step 4, is to, of course, complete the summary. So we've done a lot of the work because we've read the text, we've tried to understand it, we've identified what we feel is the main idea, key ideas, we've highlighted those, we've crossed out less important details. So we've done quite a bit of the work already, and now we need to collect the details that we highlighted in step 2, add the relevant details that we highlighted, and in our own words, complete the summary. And then finally, use a concluding sentence that reminds the reader of the main idea of the text. So what might this look like for this particular text example? And by the way, I mentioned this earlier, but for more information on how to write information from a source in your own words, you can view the paraphrasing workshop recording on the Academic Success Center website. Okay, so let's see what this summary might look like when we put it all together. So the original text is on the left of the slides. The summary that I've written is on the right hand of the slide. And we've already seen the introduction. So the first sentence, again, in the article, Benefits of Reading, Positive Impacts for All Ages Every Day, author Joseph McCrosen discusses the ways that reading can support brain development throughout our lives. So what comes next? Now we need to include those important details that we highlighted earlier. So it might sound something like this. McCrosen notes that reading helps improve our memory overall by creating the opportunity to connect new memories to older ones. It also stimulates different parts of our brain and creates stronger connections, the effects of which can last for days after reading. Okay, so all of those details have now been compiled in the next section of the summary in my own words. So you'll notice if you cross-reference the original text with my summary, the phrasing is different. The ideas are captured, the main ideas are captured, but I did not write word for word from the original, right? So I paraphrased these ideas, which again takes practice. And finally, I've written a concluding sentence. In these ways, reading helps strengthen our brains. Right? So a concluding sentence, similar to a concluding sentence in an essay or a report, will typically restate the main idea. Right? So if you compare the opening sentence, the first sentence, and the concluding sentence, there's a restating there, right? In the opening sentence, I wrote, author Joseph McCrosen discusses the ways that reading can support brain development. And then the concluding, reading helps strengthen our brains, right? So there's that restating of that main idea. This idea that reading is good for our brains, right? And you could say that in many different ways. And it's up to you how you get to decide how you want to paraphrase the original ideas. Okay, so let's wrap up the presentation today with a summary of writing summaries. Summaries are short statements that give the main information about something without giving all the details. We talked about this idea that summaries are part of our daily communication. Academic summaries, on the other hand, have certain qualities and a structure that need to be followed. And again, always check with your instructors on the guidelines around writing a summary. How long does the summary need to be? And so on. Summaries should be short, objective, and in your own words. Begin a summary with a sentence that introduces the source and main idea, then only include the key points that are relevant to the main idea. End with one sentence that restates this main idea. And lastly, following the 4 steps for writing summaries included in this presentation will help you to write a summary that accurately reflects the content of the source. Thank you very much for listening today. This is the end of the presentation.